got your Bibles with you, you can open up to the book of Ruth. We're going to conclude our study of this beautiful, short story in the Old Testament scriptures, the book of Ruth. It's a story of redemption, a story that takes place in the time of the Judges, a time when there's no king in Israel, when everyone does what is right in their own eyes. And Ruth offers us this beautiful glimpse of, yes, that's a reality that's happening, but we get introduced to Boaz, a strong, valiant, faithful, righteous man who is doing what God requires of him in the time of the Judges. And we're introduced, shockingly, to a worthy woman, a woman of great character and value, but she's not an Israelite woman, she's a Moabite woman. But Ruth is this beautiful, glorious example of somebody that enters into the covenant community by faith. She puts her faith, she gives her allegiance to Yahweh and his people. This is what she says to Naomi: your people, my people, your God, my God. It's a story that is beautiful because of the darkness that is in the story. It starts out with Elimelech and Naomi and their two sons, weak and almost dead, fleeing God's judgment, leaving the land of promise, despising the covenant and the covenant community, and going to the land of Israel's enemies, the Moabites. They end up staying there for 10 years. Somehow the boys get wives, but then the father and the boys die. Naomi is left alone with her daughters-in-law. And she hears that once again God has raised up a judge, raised up a redeemer in Israel. The famine is over. God is providing once again. She makes the decision to return. She tells the daughter-in-laws not to come with her. They didn't need to inherit her shame. She wanted them to go and find rest in the tents of their mother. And Orpah decides to go back, but Ruth refuses. Ruth has met Yahweh through Naomi and the family, and she is committed. So she returns. And when they return, though, they return in a state of vulnerability. They're living in a patriarchal society that women, widows, are left without a safety net, without a security, without much hope. And so there's this sense of vulnerability, of very real danger for Naomi and Ruth as they return. What will happen to them? Now, God has provided within the law protection for the vulnerable. We saw it in chapter 2 when Ruth went to glean in the field. Encased in the law, God had set up a system that when you farmed the land that God owned. Let's be clear about who owned the land. It was God. God had given the land to Israel as an inheritance. When you farmed the land that you had received from God, you were not to treat it as only your own. You weren't to harvest every grain, every kernel on that land. You weren't to go over it multiple times. You were to leave the edges. You were to leave some of the harvest so that the widows, the orphans, the foreigner might come and they might glean and have enough to survive. But there's another law in the law where God provided for the redemption of a family. It's called the levirate marriage, the kinsman redeemer. And this law stands behind this entire story of Ruth. I want us to look at Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 to 6. This is one of those laws in the Hebrew scriptures that we read and go, huh? Now, like some of them we get, right? Like, 10 Commandments. Don't steal. Cool, get it, right? Don't kill. All right, I'm down with that. Deuteronomy 25, 5-6, if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside of the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. There's some cultural distance between us and this law. But we have to understand, in the ancient Near Eastern culture, this was a law of mercy and grace. This was a law of protection for those that encountered unexpected or even deserved consequences and trauma. Here you have this situation. If a woman, her husband dies and she has no son, well, she has nobody to protect her in the present, and she has nobody to protect her going into the future. And so there's this, and we're going to look here later in this sermon, this is a cultural reality that actually predates the law. This was a way for society to preserve the name and the honor and the future of a family when they encountered disaster. Ruth and Naomi certainly qualify for that reality. So with that law, the law of the kinsman redeemer in mind, let's jump into Ruth chapter 4. It says, now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. Now in the Hebrew, the now is a term of immediacy. So if you remember, the night before, Ruth had gone to Boaz with a marriage proposal, and Boaz had said, I will do this. I will redeem you, but there is a kinsman redeemer closer than I. So Boaz isn't going to take shortcuts. Boaz is going to do it right. And so he says, you stay here the night, be safe. He gives her a bunch of grain as a down payment, as a pledge of the inheritance that is going to be hers, sends her back to Naomi and says, I will go take care of this. And Boaz is a man of his word. So immediately he goes up to the gate and sat down there. And you think, well, why would he do that? Because in the ancient Near East, the gate of a city was a significant place. It wasn't simply the entrance into the city. It would have been fortified for the protection of the city. It would have guarded and kept track of those that went in and out. But the gate of a city also served as the place where business transactions were done, where judgments were rendered, where you could bring an accusation or plead your case, or where you could sell some property or deal with things that affected the entire community. So he goes into the public square. He goes into the place where business is done, and it says there he sat down, and it says, and behold. And this is another term of immediacy. No sooner had he sat down, behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. Just another beautiful coincidence in the book of Ruth. Right? Like you see God's hand orchestrating and directing and superintending throughout this story. Even though God never speaks directly in the book of Ruth, God is actively at work. So Boaz goes, he sits down, and immediately the Redeemer came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend. And he turned aside and sat down. There's a detail here that I love. Ruth is a book where names matter, right? In the Old Testament, names tend to matter because they're given to reflect character and circumstances, and they're used by the authors of Scripture to convey theological meanings. We've seen that significantly in the book of Ruth. From Elimelech, my God is king, and he does not act like God is king. from Naomi, whose name means pleasant, but when she returned, she said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, call me bitter, because I went away full but came back empty. From Boaz, whose name means strength is in me, who stands in sharp contrast to Mahlon and Chilion, weak and almost dead. Now Boaz comes to the gate, sits in the public square where business is done, sees the Redeemer, and calls him over. And he says, hey, friend. Hey, friend. Now that's the English translation of two Hebrew words. Poloni almoni. Sounds like a bunch of baloney. Poloni almoni. It's just fun to say. Poloni almoni means somebody somewhere. The ESV is very generous when it says, hey, friend. Hey, somebody somewhere. Some commentators call him Mr. So-and-so. J. Vernon McGee calls him Old Barefoot. That'll make sense later in the story. But now, understand, this is a close relative of Boaz. They're both close relatives of Elimelech. It's not that Boaz doesn't know his name. In a book where names are vital and of importance, the fact that as Boaz sits there and sees this Redeemer coming and says, hey, Poloni Almoni, hey, Mr. So-and-so, come take a seat. That should catch your attention. Like if you're paying attention to the text, you go, okay, there's something going on here. Turn aside, Mr. So-and-so, sit down here. He turned aside and sat down. And then he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. Boaz has come in with a plan. He's taken the initiative. He's organizing the situation. He gets Mr. So-and-so. He gets 10 of the elders so that there are witnesses, not just any witnesses, significant witnesses, men of renown and repute, men of influence and authority. So he gets Mr. So-and-so, he gets 10 of them. They are sitting there in the gate and they sit down to do some business. Then he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So here's a little detail that we haven't had, but it makes sense. Elimelech was a man of influence when they left. There was certainly property that belonged to him as a part of the community and the tribe. But now Ruth and Naomi come back. They can't manage the land. They can't plant and reap and harvest the land on their own. And although it says that she's going to sell the land in the English, it's not that she is going to sell the land outright. It's in our culture, you can think of, we do this quite often. You can sell off your mineral rights while keeping the land. Or here in Arizona, you can, but you shouldn't, sell off your water rights while maintaining the land. That might be the worst decision you ever made. So, but what she's doing is she's selling off the right and the opportunity to farm the land, even though it would still remain in Elimelech's name, because selling land in the Israelite culture was it was a big no-no. So he said, I thought I would tell you of it. I thought I would tell you of it. This is one of those really fun Hebrew idioms. I thought I would tell you of it. Literally in the Hebrew is, I want to uncover your ear. I want to uncover your ear. I know our ushers won't get this, but you can't have hair over your ears. So I want to uncover your ear. Oh, y'all, whatever. You can't hurt me. I'm going to uncover your, I want you to pay attention. It's actually an idiom that's sometimes used of telling a secret, but what he's saying is, like, I've got some information that I need to make you aware of, and I want to do it here in the sight of these 10 elders, these 10 witnesses. I thought I would tell you of it and say to you, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one beside you to redeem it, and I come after you. So this Mr. So-and-so, Poloni Almoni, he's the closest relative to Elimelech. Maybe he was a blood brother. Maybe he was closer. Boaz is somehow connected, but he's farther away. So the right to redeem, as well as the responsibility to redeem, lands first with Mr. Poloni Almoni, Mr. So-and-so. So he says, if you're going to redeem it, redeem it. But if you're not, let me know. And here in the presence of these witnesses, I tell you, I'm going to do it because I'm the next one. Land, remember, in the Israelite context, is a part of the covenantal promise and reality between Yahweh and Israel. The land of Israel belongs to them because God gave it to them. He had the right to do it because it belongs ultimately to him. So we have all these laws in the Torah talking about how you cannot and should not sell your land. We have the law of levirate marriage protecting those that suffer tragedy so that they don't have to sell their land. Why? Because land is not just an economic resource. It's not just a material possession. It is a theological, covenantal reality. The land is the inheritance of the covenant. Think about it in that terms. To sell the land is to sell your inheritance. It's to walk away from the covenant. I can't help but think about Esau in Genesis, selling his birthright, selling his inheritance for a good cup of stew. Right? This is something that is not supposed to happen. And so God provides this way for families to be protected, for the vulnerable to be shown mercy and taken care of, and for the land to remain to those in the covenant community to which it had been given. That's why redemption needed to happen. And so Mr. So-and-so responds. He says, I will redeem it. So now we're in the middle of this drama, and we know that Ruth and Boaz, they got some feelings going for each other. We got something happening there. And now it looks like this major wrench is being thrown in. He's like, yeah, I'll do it. I'll redeem it. In fact, it's emphatic. In the Hebrew, it literally says, I will redeem it. I will redeem it. He's actually excited. See, notice, Boaz hasn't said anything about Ruth. He hasn't said anything about the levirate marriage. All he said is that the land that belonged to Elimelech is being sold, the rights to it are being sold by Naomi. And so you're the first up in the redemption. Do you want to redeem it? He's like, yeah, I'm in. Because it's all upside for him. Now he can go and farm the land. It's going to increase his economic prosperity. He's going to continue to build wealth, provide for his family. Awesome. I'm ready to redeem. I'm ready to do the right thing when it's good for me. Boaz is innocent as a dove, wise as a serpent. He says, then Boaz said, well, the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. So it's not just a land deal, Mr. So-and-so. This is a levirate marriage. This is a redemption. See, Naomi, we know, is well past the age of childbirth. All he's thinking about is the land. Naomi, I got no risk, no downside. I'm in. And Boaz goes, well, there is this little detail. The day that you take that land, you take all the responsibility for Elimelech and his namesake, and that includes not just Naomi, but that includes Ruth, the wife of his son who died. So on the day that you purchase it, you've got to marry her. Can you imagine coming home? Hey, honey, how was your day? Well, good and bad. I got some new land. I got a new field. Oh, awesome, honey. Who's that behind you? So this is complicated, but it's mandated in the law. This is his covenantal responsibility. Elimelech's line is going to vanish if somebody doesn't step in to redeem. So he says, on that day, you got to do this. And the Redeemer said, I think I spoke too soon. I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Lest I impair. Hold on to that word. It's a word that sometimes is translated waste, ruin, destroy. I can't do it. If I do that, I might ruin my own inheritance. So now we know a little bit something about Mr. So-and-so. He is a man of his times. He's going to do what is right in his own eyes, not what's right in the eyes of the Lord and in the law. No. I understand that this is what the law demands of me, but if I do that, well, there might be trouble. I'm going to have to put all sorts of resources in, and I'm not going to get anything back. So I cannot redeem it. I might impair my own inheritance. So you take the right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Not true. He should have said, I will not redeem it. He could, but he chose not to. Once again, he's doing what is right in his own eyes. But that word there, lest I impair my own inheritance, if you're a careful Jewish student of the word, that word is going to catch your attention. It's a rather rare word, but it's actually used in a very important story in the book of Genesis. It's a messy story. It's kind of an ugly story. Genesis chapter 38 starts telling the story of Judah. Judah has a wife and has 3 sons, and his oldest son marries a woman named Tamar. But Judah's son, Er, was evil. Not just a little evil, big evil. So evil, and the text is phenomenal in this, said he was so evil in the sight of the Lord that Yahweh killed him. That's evil. Right? Like, that's evil. And so it says that his brother, the next brother, Onan, was supposed to go in and take Tamar and provide an heir for her so that the name might continue. But Onan was evil. And this is one of those stories, it's definitely not PG-13. Onan goes into Tamar, and he wants the benefit of laying with her, but doesn't want the risk of impregnating her. So in Genesis 38, it says that Onan would go in and lay with her, but then he would spill his seed on the ground. The word there is the exact same word that Mr. So-and-so uses when he says, my inheritance would be threatened, it would be wasted, it would be spilled. Onan, see, he's on the surface fulfilling the role of the Redeemer, but doing so selfishly. And it says he was so evil for doing that, God killed him. So Judah's looking at this and going, I married 2 of my sons to this woman, and it's not going well. And he's got one more son. He's younger. His name's Shelah. And so he says to Tamar, you just need to wait a while. We'll let Shelah grow up, and then he'll do the kinsman redeemer thing, and so you just got to wait. So she waits, and it becomes clear that he has no intention of giving his 3rd son to Tamar. And so as time passes, Judah's wife dies, and he goes on a business journey, and Tamar learns of it and comes up with a plan. You remember this story, y'all? It's scandalous, right? So she takes off the widow's garments, she dresses up like a shrine prostitute and waits for Judah. So Judah comes along, his wife is dead, he's on a business trip, sees the shrine prostitute, does what he does. She takes his signet and some proof from him of payment, and then he leaves and she disappears. She conceives from that chance encounter. So 3 months later, when it becomes known that she's pregnant, Judah, in a fit of self-righteous anger and rage, demands that she be killed. She simply pulls out his signet and proof that it was actually he that had impregnated her, to which he says, leave her alone. She's more righteous than I. There's a lot of mystery in that text. Fascinating. But that stands in the backdrop of Ruth. That's pre-law, y'all. That's before the Torah. This is happening in the house of Judah to provide. And so she gives birth to 2 twins. It's one of those weird twin deliveries where one thrusts out an arm, you got to tie it out. And so you get, listen. It's so good that women give birth and not men. That's all I'm going to say about that. So she gives birth to twins, Perez and Zerah. Okay, so that's in the backdrop of this story. You're going to see it come up again here in a minute. So back to Ruth. So verse 7 says, "Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and thus was the manner of attesting in Israel." And you're like, well, of course. I mean, that's how a deal is done, right? You just take off a sandal and make it so. You know what? I don't know how many of you have purchased a home or a vehicle and gotten wrist pain from having to sign your name so many times, right? That taking off your sandal sounds like a good deal, right? It actually makes sense. If you think about the cultural context of making a land transaction, and we're talking about rocky wilderness, taking off your shoe is an act of intent. You don't lose your shoe by accident. And we're not also talking about like mass-produced Nikes or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, you'd be able to identify the shoe to the owner if it ever came to that. You couldn't say, hey, I found this shoe, so the land belongs to me. Like, it's a process, right? And so one of the interesting details is that this verse really shows significantly that the story of Ruth, though it takes place in the time of Judges, was written significantly later. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to explain the custom. By the time that it was written, and we know that later on in the history of Israel, they actually had deeds to the land. So you would exchange a deed, but in this time, they're swapping sandals. So, when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and to all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. And also Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers, and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." You know, Boaz mentions by name everybody in the story, almost, you know, and so once again we see that irony of Mr. Poloni Almoni not being named. Because he chose not to redeem Naomi and preserve the name of Elimelech, his name has been lost to history. But Boaz, on the other hand, because he did the right thing, the righteous thing, is remembered and honored for what he did. This is also the last time that Ruth is referred to in the book of Ruth as Ruth the Moabitess. It's almost as if Boaz wants to make sure and very clear that he has his eyes wide open, he knows what he is doing, and he is choosing to marry Ruth the Moabitess. He wants everybody to know it. He wants it to be crystal clear. He wants it to be witnessed by the 10 witnesses. There's no shame. He doesn't want any accusations. He wants everybody to be clear. Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I will take as my wife. I've bought as my wife, so that the inheritance may go on. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, so not just the 10 witnesses, but people are paying attention. This is kind of big deal in a smaller town. And they all say, we are witnesses. May Yahweh make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. You can't, in the Jewish context, have a higher blessing than that. Rachel and Leah are the matriarchs of the nation. They are the two mothers of the 12 tribes. There is no Israel without Rachel and Leah. So people hear Boaz's commitment. I'm marrying Ruth the Moabitess, and they respond. They say, we're witnesses. We're down with it. May Yahweh bless you. May Yahweh bless the woman, Ruth, that you're bringing. May she be like, think about this. May she be like Leah and Rachel, who birthed Israel. I've mentioned before, every blessing, every prayer in the book of Ruth actually comes true. This one as well. Ruth will be like Leah and Rachel. Ruth will give birth to the line of the ultimate and the true Israel, Jesus the Christ. Right? But we don't know that yet, so pretend I didn't say that. They say, may you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem, and may your house be like the house of who? Perez. Who was Perez? Yeah, that was Judah and Tamar's baby. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that Yahweh will give you by this young woman. High praise, high blessing. So Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. He went into her, and Yahweh gave her conception, and she bore a son. What an interesting little detail and phrase. Yahweh gave her conception. I think it's highly likely that up until this point, Ruth had been infertile. She'd been married to Mahlon for a significant amount of time and had not produced an heir. In a culture that didn't have contraceptives, in a culture that valued fertility above almost all else, she probably was looked at as infertile, unable to produce. And so that may have been another reason Mr. So-and-so wasn't interested in getting into this deal. But Boaz goes in, and Yahweh blesses, opens her womb, which is promised in the covenant. If you're faithful to me, I will bless you. I will open your womb. And so Yahweh puts his blessing. We've had the elders, we've had those at the gates. They've all acknowledged, they've all blessed Ruth, they've blessed Boaz, and now God blesses them. Gave her conception, and she bore a son. Verse 14, then the women said to Naomi, this is where it kind of takes a little hard right here. Culturally, this is interesting. The women said to Naomi, blessed be Yahweh, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. May his name be renowned in Israel. So it was Boaz and Ruth that had this baby, but the women in the community come to Naomi and say, man, may God be blessed for what he has done for you. he shall be to you a restorer of life, a nourisher for your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons. What a phrase that is. Here, the whole problem for Naomi and Ruth is that they don't have sons. They don't have that inheritance. They don't have that future. And the women in the community come around Naomi and say, Ruth is so valuable. Her character, her heart, her commitment, her faithfulness is worth so much. She's worth more to you than 7 sons. That's high praise. She has given birth to him. And then it says, then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. Became his mother. You understand, the redemption, Ruth, the redemption is for Elimelech and his offspring, which included Mahlon and Chilion. Though Ruth participates with Boaz, it's ultimately Elimelech and Naomi that are the recipients of the redemption. So the child, though it is Ruth and Boaz's, is Naomi's. The one who said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. I'm bitter. I went away full. I came back empty. Now we have in the closing chapter of Ruth, Naomi is sitting there with this blessing on her lap. She's nursing him, raising him. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name. This is a strange little detail. To be honest, I have no clue. I really don't. Sorry. You're going to have to go find a smarter pastor than me to figure this out. I don't know why the women name him. That's not normal. Usually it's the father, the mother. But the women give this child a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. So they named him Obed. 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 It means servant. He who serves. It means worker. The one who works. Can also mean worshiper. The one who worships. We'll come back to Obed in a second, but it says, then we get the surprise ending. It says, he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So this child of the levirate marriage, this child of redemption becomes the grandfather of David, the man after God's own heart, the one who led Israel better than anyone ever led them until Jesus. David the king, David the giant slayer, David the poet is the descendant of Boaz and Ruth the Moabitess. We see this in Matthew chapter 1, in the lineage of Jesus. In a lineage, a list of family names where we would expect to only see men listed, we have Tamar listed. We have Ruth, the Moabite, listed. They are the ancestors of Jesus, the King. It ends with this little genealogy. These are the generations of Perez. Perez followed Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. That guy was a little fishy. You had to watch out for him. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. Jesse fathered David. Even in a time when there's no king in Israel and everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes, God is working. God is orchestrating. God is designing. And God is moving his plan of redemption forward. In the most unexpected, quite frankly, scandalous way, Ruth the Moabitess and Boaz become the examples of faithfulness to Yahweh. And God blesses their faithfulness by using them to be in the family tree that brings about the ultimate kinsman redeemer, Jesus, the King. You know, and that's low-hanging fruit. When we start thinking about application and what this might mean for us, Boaz is clearly a type of Christ. Like it's like you have to be willfully blind to not see this. Boaz is the one who has strength in him. Boaz is the one that acts in grace. He provides and protects, expecting nothing in return. He purchases and redeems. He gives life and an inheritance. Boaz is a foreshadow, a pointer, a precursor of the true Israel, the true king. Boaz planned it and took the initiative. Boaz paid the price. Boaz publicly claimed Ruth. And Boaz provided an inheritance. Can we not see this morning that Jesus did that for us? That Jesus is the one that planned our salvation before the foundation of the world, that Jesus is the one that took the initiative. Jesus is the one that came after us while we were still dead in our sins and trespasses. Jesus is the one that paid the price in the public square and publicly claims us as his own. And Jesus has provided and guarantees us a future and an inheritance. Jesus is clearly the ultimate Boaz and the ultimate kinsman redeemer. Like I said, that's low-hanging fruit. I want us to think about Obed this morning. Obed, he doesn't act, doesn't say anything. He's just a baby who somehow becomes the grandfather of David. Obed is named by the women. Jesus, like Obed, is the ultimate worker or servant. The name Obed means worker or servant. It comes from this verb that's very important. It's very important in the history of the Scriptures. We find it, shockingly, if you've been around here for a while, right in the beginning in Genesis. When mankind is created, in Genesis 2:15, God puts the man in the garden and told him to work it and to keep it. That work it is that verb, Obed, that Obed comes from. To work, to serve, to worship. Later on when the tabernacle is constructed, the temple is built, and the priests are commanded to serve in the worship of the Lord. They're commanded to work it and to serve it. Same word. When Israel found itself enslaved in Egypt, in Exodus chapter 1:13, it says, they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter with hard service and mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. See, we're made by God as his imagers to work with him in his creation. But when sin happens, when death enters, when rebellion comes around, our work is transformed into toil, into slavery. When we work for something other than God, it is slavery. When God sends Moses to go and confront Pharaoh, Moses is told to say this to Pharaoh. So we know the first part so well. Let my people go. Let my people go. But it's the last part that's so important. That they may serve me. That they may worship me. You want to guess what that word is? Yeah, that's that word work. That they may work for me. That they may become what I made them to be. That they might step into their role as imagers. That they might serve. They might work. They might do what they were made to do. They've been slaving for you. They've been working for you. I want to set them free that they might work for me. That they might participate in the role that I've fashioned them for. See, Jesus, as the ultimate Israel, as the ultimate son, as the faithful Son, shows us what it looks like to be truly and fully human, shows us what it looks like to be an imager of God, to work, to serve, to worship. Like Jesus, he's saying this all the time. John chapter 4, verse 34, Jesus said to them, my food. So this is the woman at the well. Jesus sends the disciples in to get some lunch. He waits at the well. The woman comes out. They have this whole conversation about worship, and it's amazing. And she goes back in and leads a whole bunch of people to faith in Jesus, and it's beautiful. But meanwhile, the disciples come back, and they're like, here, Jesus, we brought you lunch. And Jesus says to them, you know what? My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. You know, Jesus, one day when he's been accused for breaking the law and violating the Sabbath, you know, Jesus said, you know, my Father is always at work, even until now, and I am working. I'm working. You know, at the very end, right before he goes to the cross, the upper room discourse, John chapter 17, Jesus prays, I glorified you on earth, having accomplished the work that you gave me to do. We've been created to work, to serve, to worship, to join God in his act of bringing order out of chaos, beauty and life to God's creation, of bringing God's will and God's rule to all of God's creation. Jesus shows us what that looks like in his faithfulness and his obedience to the Father. He came to work, and he did the work. Because Jesus faithfully did the work. See, there's a misunderstanding. We think, well, Jesus did the work, therefore I don't have to. And that's true on the level if you're thinking about trying to gain or earn or work your way towards the free gift of grace and salvation in King Jesus. You don't, Jesus died on the cross, you don't have to. But, y'all, Jesus died on the cross so you could be fully and truly human. So you could be the man, you could be the woman that God always designed you to be. That you could stand up and be the imager. That you could stand up and do the works that God has prepared for you in advance. You're made to work. You're made to serve. You're made to worship. Jesus gives us the ability to be faithful to our creation mandate and calling. We see that all through the New Testament. You know, one of my favorites is in Acts chapter 13, verse 2. Acts chapter 13, verse 2 says, while they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said to them, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work that I have called them to. So God has created us and called us to work, but it's not work that we have to invent. It's not work that we have to figure out on our own. It's work that God calls us to. Not easy work. It's not simple work, but it's meaningful work. And God had called Barnabas and Paul to that work. Didn't mean that they were the only ones working. It meant that was their work. They were supposed to go do their work while everybody else did their work. We're not only called, we're empowered. God's not going to leave you alone, right? That's what Jesus said. I'm not going to leave you alone. I'm not going to leave you as orphans. I will ask the Father, and he will send you a helper, an advocate, a paraclete, one who's going to come alongside you, one who will be in you, one who seals you until the day of redemption. I'm going to send you the Spirit. And so that work that God has created for us to do, that work that Jesus is inviting us into, he doesn't leave us alone to fulfill it in our own strength. He gives us the Spirit so that we might fulfill the work that he invites us to. 1 Corinthians 15:58, therefore, my beloved brothers, sisters, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. For it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure, Philippians 2:13. Jesus rescues us. Jesus forgives us. Jesus redeems us. Jesus adopts us. Jesus names us sons and daughters. Jesus fills us with the Spirit of God so that we might join him in the family business. The work of reconciliation, the work of life and beauty, the work of truth and goodness, the work of faithfulness, service, love, and worship. I'll end this morning with Paul's words from Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. The apostle to the Gentiles writes this: whatever you do, whatever you do, your dog washer, your retired poker player, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for man. Whatever you do, whatever it is that God is inviting you into, whatever it is that God has called you into, you have been called to work. You have been called to serve in the kingdom. Working and serving does not equal showing up on Sunday morning and sitting in the pew. That's good. Keep it up. That's good. But that's not the work that you've been called to. It's not the work that you've been invited to. That work is in your home. It's in your family. It's in your workplace. It's in your neighborhood. It's in the communities that God places you. It's in the places where God leads you. God is inviting you to bring his very presence and spirit with you wherever you go and to join him in the work of reconciling the world unto himself. So, church, whatever you do, work strongly. Work mightily. Work with discipline and intention. Work with heart. Work with wisdom. Work with passion. Work sacrificially as unto the Lord and not to man. Amen?